always tell people that the main reason I love working with data is because I get to tell people what to do, and then I get to back it up with hard facts.
Because when you go to a meeting with no data, everybody would look at you and will say, why are you telling me to do that? But when you back up with data, then nobody can say to you it's not true. So data is everything.
Hello and welcome to Women XAI, the podcast. Today, your hosts are me, Jenny K. Pollock, and my amazing co-host,
Reut Lazo here. Hi, everyone.
And today, what we're going to be talking about is the intersection of AI and data. Everyone's talking about AI, and there's new tools, and there's new models, and there's all of these things. But the one thing that is the common thread, no matter what tool you're using or what you're trying to do, is the data. And so what Reut and I did is we went through and we picked the best minds that we could come up with in our community who are working at the intersection of AI and data. I'm so excited to get to introduce them to all of you. First up, we have Annie, who is at Google. Annie, can you say hi and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, this is Annie, and I'm currently working at Google Cloud, and where I focus on customers who are building LLM foundation models to effectively adopt our data platform solutions.
That is so cool. And, just a quick story. I met Annie a couple weeks ago at this Gangels investing event, and we just clicked right away, and we had such a good time. And I said, Annie, you got to be part of our community. So she's here, and I'm so excited. Next up, we have Kasia Rachuta from Square, and I'm so excited to welcome her. We are just thrilled to learn more about what she's doing and how she's using data and AI.
Hi everyone, I'm Kasia. I currently work at Block. I work within identity verification space at Square. I have been at Block for over 6 years, so a long time at one company. And before that, I spent a few years working at smaller companies such as Medium, 5stars, and Unoodle.
Very cool. What fun companies to work at. I'm really excited to learn more about what you're doing. And geez, 6 years in startup land, that's like a really long time. Amazing. And last up for our guests, we have Rachel Mak-McCully from Unlearn, one of our longtime community members, who was the first person I went to when I said I wanted to talk about AI and data. Rachel, can you say hi?
Hi, my name is Rachel Mak-McCully. My background is in sleep neuroscience, and I currently work at Unlearn, which is a startup in health AI. And I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation and to get to learn from all of you as well.
That is super incredible. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Let's zoom out a little bit and try to see, why does data really matter right now? So who wants to start to share their insights with us?
I can go first.
Sure.
I think what you were mentioning, Jenny, is we hear a lot about these models, right? We hear about all these benchmarks that the models are meeting, all of these tasks that they're able to do, and there's very little talk about the data that underlies it. And so I was so excited you were putting together this panel just because I feel like it's so overlooked, this question. Like, people don't even ask questions about the data. And this is something that I in particular spend a lot of time making sure that we have good quality harmonized data for our models to work on. I just think that it is just a conversation that needs to happen more in this space.
Absolutely. And actually, I have worked in the database for about over a decade. Although, our conversation about the foundation models, like Gen AI foundation models, happened like in recent 3 years. But actually, for the past couple decades, data and AI actually come together really tightly. So I would love to share some insights I learned over the past decade.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that data with AI is becoming more and more important. I'm curious, how did all of you get your start working in data? And how have you seen AI maybe change the field a little bit?
So my interest in the intersection between data and AI really stems from my academic background in information systems, where I focus primarily on data processing and analytics. and which need me various roles like data engineers within a company, technical consultant, and solution architect in Google and Microsoft. Where I see constantly there's a lot of innovation stemmed from proper use of data. And for me, right, the data and AI is always like peanut butter and jelly. They tie really together. We need a good data to build a good models. And we, in return, good models actually can fine tune the data pipeline. So that's where I see a lot of opportunity and excitement around that. And also recently, I'm incredibly really lucky to be working directly with some of the foundational model builders, which we're tackling a lot of fascinating problems in data.
That's so interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Rachel, can you tell us about your point of view?
Sure. I think for me, it's a triangle. It's data, AI, and health. Health has always been an important aspect for me. Given my academic background in sleep, I spent a lot of time looking at sleep recordings from the brain. And so you have hours and hours of data, right, every single night from someone. And it's just really cool with all of the advances, not only in being able to analyze large amounts of data, but being able to collect large amounts of data and being able to collect that outside of a sleep lab, for example. And we know that sleep is so integral to so many different aspects of health. And so for me, what I get excited about is the impact, right? That we're able to get more insights from people's healthcare data, and we're able to give them those insights so they can have, more autonomy over their healthcare decisions.
That's so cool looking at how sleep could help or how data could help you sleep better. I actually have one of those Sleep 8 machines, and like it can cool or raise the temperature of the bed itself. And so I do get a lot of data on that. And I don't think I use the data enough. Like maybe I should be looking at the app every now and then and seeing what it's saying.
That's so cool. I know of Sleep 8, and it just seems like a really neat concept. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you asking other ways that people can
Yeah.
be aware of their sleep?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
read my
So
mind. What are other ways to get like data on your sleep?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of wearable devices now that are really good. I'm a big fan of the Aura Ring, but I also think, right, you can go to the opposite extreme sometimes now where you try to over optimize everything, right, and you try to track everything. And so I actually still think that a ground truth for sleep is if you wake up feeling refreshed, you're getting enough sleep.
That is such a good point. It's really interesting because when there is so much data, you can do a lot. Kasia, can you tell us about your background in the intersection of AI and data?
Yeah, so I also come from a fairly academic background. Studied, I ended up with a master's in theoretical physics. I knew I didn't want to do that, but it also involved some programming. It actually involved a lot of data. So having spent a year in front of a computer, I knew I wanted to do something like that. But I knew I also didn't want to be a software engineer. So I kind of came across a role, applied for it. They kind of picked up on the fact that I have done a lot of data analysis, and that they asked me if I wanted to do that for 6 months for them. So I was like, yeah, let's try it. I just graduated. I don't know what to do next with myself. So that's kind of how I ended up in tech, and then I realized I love it. And I always tell people that the main reason I love working with data is because I get to tell people what to do, and then I get to back it up with hard facts, especially men.
Nice.
It's kind of fun. Yes.
Yeah.
That is
Um,
so cool because when you have the data, you can tell people how to how to actionize about it, right? Because when you go to a meeting with no data, everybody would look at you and will say, "Why are you telling me to do that?" But when you back up with data, then nobody can actually, say to you, "It's not true," or "We should not do that." So, data is everything.
100%.
It
Yeah.
is.
It's always good to back up your claims, and I think that's why I think that data is very much a strategic function because you need to use the data and then draw conclusions. And I still sometimes end up working with people who have trouble connecting the dots and kind of being like, okay, so data tells us one thing, what do we do with it? Or like, what is the decision that kind of naturally comes out of it? And it's always fun to help people make those connections.
There's a image that's circulating around on LinkedIn, and it is Legos, and it's like this big pile of Legos, and they're all a mess. And it talks about how it's like unstructured data, and then they sort them by color, and then maybe that's structured data, and then after that comes the house, and it's like the storytelling with data, like the house made out of Legos. I don't know if any of you can speak to that, or if you even know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I think I saw that picture before, and it actually explains exactly life cycle in our data work, right? We started with somebody is collecting data from various sources, then load it into a central place, clean it up, transform it so that there's readiness to the next stage. Can be machine learning training, can be just direct reporting. So it's usefully the entire cycle with that.
That's so cool. Ray, I think you also had a question.
Yeah, I was wanting to refer to Kasia's comment. You said, with the data being the new oil, and everybody knows that's the biggest asset out there right now, right? And with that, you can actually do something and make a better decision. But how do you know, like, who is owning that input? Like, who is refining it? Who is the decision maker to make those big decisions?
Yeah, what a loaded question.
It's a lot.
Yeah, so in my job, both engineering and data define logging, and we kind of sign off on it and work on it very closely. In many ways, I feel really lucky because I've always worked at companies that don't do anything weird or sketchy with the data, and always need to have training about what data we collect, why we don't collect a lot of like external data, why we don't track users beyond our website, that sort of thing. So it's always felt that the companies I've worked on had a lot of checks and balances in place right off the bat in terms of like what we do. And we're also aware that perhaps there's limitations to what we can do because we don't have like all of this data that some other companies may be logging. But in terms of like the user actions, things like that, that's I'm very closely to that, to what that's where in particular merchants are doing, how we log what they do and how we use that data to make better decisions, and help them have a better experience with the product versus just thinking about revenue. It's good to be at a company that's very mission driven, which is like for Square, it's economic empowerment.
Anybody else wants to add to that perspective?
I think it also depends on what kind of company structure it is. Look, typically, with large enterprises, have different data roles. We have data engineer, data infra engineer, database manager, data analyst, data scientist. So typically, the data engineer and the data infra engineer will work with system engineers on the collection pieces, the refining pieces, and make data accessible for downstream. And then with data scientists and data analysts, they will actually primarily working with business stakeholders, say finance team, sales team, product team, to acquire what kind of matrix those business teams want to see. Then they will decide, how we design the system, what kind of data we need, and what kind of report we need to build. So I typically see this kind of collaboration across different teams.
It's so true. Teamwork makes the dream work, especially with data, and you have so much of it, right?
I was going to say, from the health perspective, I think it's a little bit different because, at least at my company, we don't collect data. We work with data that's been collected already in, say, clinical trials or observational trials. But I think in health in general, we have the issue that data are really spread out in a lot of different areas, right? So we don't necessarily work in the healthcare space, but you can imagine in the healthcare space, there's a lot of companies trying to work, for example, with real world data. But for example, you go to your primary care doctor, that data is stored one place. But if you were to go for an emergency room visit, that information is going to be stored elsewhere. So you don't necessarily have a comprehensive picture. And even in the clinical trial space, there's a lot of consortiums, which are great for sharing data for particular diseases, for example. But you can imagine if you're a pharmaceutical company and you run a clinical trial, you own that data. And so it's not something that you are going to want to give to another pharmaceutical company. So the data, I feel, in health is a little bit more siloed than it might be in other domains.
Absolutely. I was wondering, have you ever encountered like a scenario when you realized the data that you were collecting was skewed or biased, kind of like an unusable, basically? And what did you do?
Well, I've been at a variety of different companies throughout the years, and I've seen this, and it's been a challenge to make sure you're collecting the right data, making sure it's labeled correctly, and getting to the right place. What would you recommend if somebody's, at a startup and their data is maybe not captured, or maybe it has some holes in it? How do you deal with this?
I think alignment with your data team is really, really key here. There is a lot of feedback needed to be provided after the product is out. For example, right, a vivid example recently I have found out is a lot of image generation models. If you ask this typical question, for example, hey, create me a CEO who is drinking coffee and read newspaper in the morning, and the model tended to come out with a male, figure. And that's actually kind of reasonable because if you're thinking about the training process of the foundation models, right? They are feeding data from the real life images, right? And because real life data is actually skewed, unfortunately the model adopts to that, right? That's really needs we as a user report on this. Hey, this is biased, this is having problem, can you fix it? And then the product teams and the vendors of those product will take those feedback and then to check if there is a way we can add bias check during training phase. So that's something
we talk about all the time with the Women X AI community is that, some of these models don't necessarily have people that look like us represented in the beginning. And sometimes you can go in and ask, hey, I would like a female CEO, and sometimes you'll get what you want. But the tools that we build reflect the biases of our society that we live in. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done, not just on the tech side of things, but outside of that as well.
And on the data collection side, I think this is something that's kind of commonly known as well in clinical trials, that previously women weren't really represented in clinical trials. So a fairly recent example of that is Ambien, that the dosing that was given was based on men. And so for women, it was the dosing was way over what it should be. And so there have been a lot of changes and pushes for changes to make sure that the data that you are collecting is representative of the population who would actually be taking the drug. So it is not just refining the models, but I think as you've all been pointing out, the underlying data that feeds into those models.
Yeah, one more thing I want to add is like now we depend a lot of with Gen AI models, right? But I think as a user, we do need to keep in mind some of the model has hallucination, right? Then there's techniques to be considered is the grounding with search, grounding with your own enterprise data, right? Tools like Notebook LM and Agent Space, right? That has a lot of grounding capabilities for you to allow you like basically limit the data input. What do you want to use? So,
Absolutely. And Annie, I want to double down on that. And you also mentioned that, the product team or people need to notice and go over the data output that we're getting. So I was wondering, what kind of like role does the human factor come into play when we're talking about data? We always keep talking about the human in the loop, right? Throughout the process of AI. So when it comes to data, where is the human in the loop comes into play?
Yes, when coming to the data, human in the loop has played in multiple phases. For example, in terms of model training, there is a phase there's a phase is called alignment or fine tuning. And with the alignment phase, there is a lot of technique. For example, reinforcement learning with human feedback. That's where a lot of scientists and the data team to collect real life human labeled data to help fine tune and align the model to have a better outcome. So that's something in the pre-inference phase where models are being controlled by human feedback. And another thing is, if you are working with a lot of ChatGPT, Gemini-like models in their product, when you chat with them, actually, if you notice, when there's an answer come back to you, there is thumbs up, some down. And then there is also a direct link to, hey, report this answer to be any feedback for this answer, right? So really do use those kind of features, because that's how we also can influence as a consumer side. So
it is so cool to see those like loops being built into the product, because ChatGPT did not used to ask that, and then it did. And so it wants to know what Jenny Pollock is interested in, and I really appreciate that.
Yep, seen it. I also often just tell it in my words, like, what are you doing? This is not what I asked for, when it frustrates me.
Yeah, and you should go back and forth with it. There's this iteration thing. I think when people first start using AI, they think, oh, it knows. And guess what? It doesn't. It is just a tool. It's been trained on a data set. Most of the time, the end user doesn't know what it's actually been trained on, except for the information that you then give it for your prompt. So it's really interesting to be in this world where you get to decide what information to give the AI, and it can try and get you to where you want to
I like that you point out to Annie about that's a way that we can participate, because I think part of the narrative around AI is it's inevitable, it's coming, and it's just like this wave that's going to crash over us, but that there are ways, that each of us can contribute to making it the AI that we'd like it to be.
That's really beautiful, Rachel. And I do think it's so important that all of our voices are represented as we're building what I believe is the next era of computing. I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about privacy versus progress, and where does that line get drawn, and how are we drawing it? We keep collecting more and more data, and we're training smarter systems and bigger systems. And I'm just curious what all of your thoughts are on this. What are some of the ethical tensions that you see bubbling up as we collect data?
actually, though I'm not at the forefront on this topic, but I do see a lot of vivid examples. Recently, when I saw some podcast, I remember Sam Altman mentioned in the recent episode of Hard Fork Live, and he mentioned that when users who are sending clear signals to the model that they have intention for self-harm, where does the model builders should intervene, right? Should we collect user data so that we can quickly find nearby helps, right, to prevent that? And it's really hard to debate, actually, how to balance data collection and in respect with user privacy, at the same time ensure the safe use of the models.
Absolutely, Annie. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think those embedded factors inside of the product are so important. I can tell you that one time I discovered there is a toggle on the Chat GPT to not train the model on your personal data, and it just blew my mind. I'm like, what? I can turn this thing off, to not be trained on my data? So you really need to drill into those systems. Don't take them for granted. Look how you can make sure your data is protected, and it doesn't have to be trained on your data. Just need a little bit more of exploration.
And another thing I'd add to that is it is different sometimes if you're paying for the enterprise level. Your terms of service might be different than that of a free user. So definitely always be sure to check out your terms and services. I know one of our community members Tara Thompson is always talking about this and even has some recommendations on how to understand your terms of service for your AI tools. The next piece I wanted to talk about with this is we look at some of these emerging policies like the EU AI Act or GDPR influencing the way that companies collect data. And I was curious, how important are those policies? Do you think that policy should be playing a role, or any guesses about what might be next?
I have a few thoughts.
Yeah.
I was really I was really excited to join this group because I think that we have such in the array of like regulated spaces, right, and tech forward. There's just such an array of experiences in this chat, and for health in particular, it's highly regulated. So I think a lot of these questions don't necessarily come back to affect us. It's like if you want to operate in that space, these are the regulations that you need to follow. But two aspects that I wanted to point out is one, I've seen, for example, being at healthcare startups, that if there are new regulations in a particular part of the world, we just adopt the strictest standards, right? Because it's actually more expensive to have multiple work streams. And so if you have these regulations, that can have an effect on making everything more protected. But the other thing is I was actually, even though this book is almost 10 years old now, I've been reading Weapons of Math Destruction. And what she brought up, which is still very relevant today, and again, the impact is just even bigger, right? Where it's not just big data, it's AI, is that there are proxies, and especially Kasha coming from like a financial, startup space where that's also heavily regulated. She talks in particular about different proxies, right, for finances, and the same thing could be said for health. So you aren't using race, for example, but you might be using zip code, right? And so you are taking a lot of proxies, and so those proxies aren't protected in the same way that your health information or your financial information is protected, but a lot can be done with that. And I think that that's something for us to all keep in mind as we move forward as well.
Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. I think it is interesting to see how regulation in one area of the world could actually end up benefiting another area.
Yeah, so I'm personally just a fan of legislation more broadly. Otherwise, companies who just run wild and can do whatever. And I think governments should protect people. I think the flip side of it is that sometimes politicians don't really know what's going on in the tech world, so they may be flying a little blind or making a legislation about something that they're not familiar with. But in general, like, I don't think that companies more broadly should be trusted to do the right thing. I think, there will be companies who will like take pride in like, we're doing the right thing and this is how we collect or data, or this is what we do with AI. But there will be a lot of companies that will just do whatever they want for profit if they are unchecked.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in Silicon Valley for a decade, and it's so often we're asking, can we build this? Not should we build this? So I absolutely feel you there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to pivot a little bit and just focus on the amazing group of women that are here today. We are all women here working in technology, in the AI space. And, for decades, we've been building some critical kind of technology, but women often being, invisible in technology in their roles. And I don't know, how do you see women in the data world and your perspective of being a woman in the AI space, building data structures? So how do you think a woman is played in the data world, and if there's any way we can emphasize what we do here and your work?
Yes, this is what I have observed on data teams. I typically see a well-balanced distribution between genders within data scientist and data analyst role. Mm-hmm. However, when it comes to the roles like data engineer, data infra, data DBAs, I tend to notice there's a skew, high proportion of male employees. I have a theory. This is because the pipeline and attraction in terms of the STEM background, So that's what we can do is like do more of these kind of women in AI or women in tech communities, do a lot of students mentorship, right, to help, and then show examples to them that what a fun work job it is in the data eng world.
It is, it is. Rachel, what do you think? I know we did an event together when we supported Unlearn, and it was so exciting to see the panelists and the work that you've been doing in Unlearn. And we saw how many women are supported over there and working over there. So can you tell us a little bit more about your perspective on it?
Sure, yes, and I so appreciated your support. It was such a wonderful community that came together that evening. Yeah, I would say what I have seen also mirrors what Annie says, that as roles seem to get more technical, then it tends to be more male dominated. And I think there's a couple things that we can do. Well, one, I would like to say, for me personally, I love being in the data. Right? Like, I really like being in the raw data, looking at the raw data. Building models is really cool. But I think part of the shift is not necessarily moving more women into the more technical roles, right? But it is actually understanding the importance, right, of data and the importance of doing those data analytics and data scientist roles. And then also, I think it's having allies who push you before you're ready, right? So who see a desire in you, and also the potential, and give you that opportunity, and also give you the support. Because I found that there are a lot of people who are willing to support you, and you also have to take the leap to be able to put yourself out there.
Absolutely.
Maybe we can build a new rules. Now we have discussed a lot of unbiased, biased, skewed data, and feel like we should have a data committee, and with diverse background to contribute. Hey, we might overlook some of the data examples and things like that.
I love that.
I love this idea.
Yeah, same. Data committees sounds like a great idea to support one another and have more women in the STEM coming in. I was wondering, as we were discussing, the data and how we're shaping and building it, can you maybe share a moment where you had to say how the data was actually collected, modeled, and applied through those models? Like when you really had to say, this has to change, I need to modify it because this is not working. This is pivotal for this kind of structure. I know when I'm building those models or building those rags, all of a sudden I see like very old data and I'm like, hold on, we need to revise this data. This is very old. We need to take this out. We need to add filtering, tagging, anything else, or build a different data sets from this. Did you ever had a moment like this? Rachel, I know you have probably because you're advising to other companies
Well,
and their data.
yeah, I was gonna say, it's always really nice to have like a succinct example, and I don't for this, but I wanted to say that coming back to like being in a place where data is really respected, right, and the importance of the data, is that I would say as data scientists as a whole, we do have a lot of say. So again, we're not collecting the data ourselves, so we don't have a lot of say over the collection process. But when we get the data in the house, we are really empowered to say, okay, is this the data? Are these the data that we need? What is the quality of this data? How is it that we can process this data? And how can we utilize it with the other data that we have? And we also work very tightly during the model development process to really understand. So as our modelers are working, they're coming back to us and they're saying, we're seeing this. Does that make sense based on what you know about the data? So there's really this iterative process. So I love that. I love that that is just part of our workflow. So yes, there's probably been a number of times, but we just sort of expect it, and that is part of the process.
So cool to hear about how your voices are part of that process. And then especially when we get to AI, it's part of the output that they're sharing. Like it's important. And so I think it's really cool. I want to welcome you guys to a new thing we're trying. This is our lightning round. I have 3 questions for all of you to answer, and we're going to do them quick. So The first question is, which AI tool do you have strong feelings about this week?
Okay, this is an old tool, but I actually have to say thanks to you, Jenny. So, Perplexity. You have said for a long time that Perplexity has replaced Google search for you. And I think that when you get advice in AI, you have to try it out for yourself. And it's taken a few iterations, but now I'm like, wow, this is really incredible for me in particular, because I needed to ramp up on a new area where I needed to be able to verify the sources. So I really liked being able to click and say, okay, this is a reference that I trust. So that's been game changing for me this week.
Yes, actually, I cannot emphasize enough how much I love notebook LLM. Especially on the side, I'm also studying at Stanford programs, and a lot of new concept has a lot of information. I put those articles and papers into notebook, and it generates a podcast which I can listen on my way to work. I'm just, yeah, love it.
I mean, my strong feeling tool is Goose, which is an agent that's been built by my company. It's open source too, so anyone can use them, but it's essentially connected to our Snowflake, to our data, to everything. So I do a lot of my work in it, with it. There's many times when it actually sped up my workflows or did some analysis that I knew it's going to be did some analysis for me that I knew it's going to be very consuming and potentially convoluted in a much shorter space of time. And I am the human in the loop working with it. So I keep on checking it. I sometimes can tell it like, hey, make sure you use this table, not this thing, to make sure that it is fairly accurate. Yeah, and there is big emphasis on us using it. So I
That's so
spend a lot
cool.
of my time in it.
I haven't played with this yet. How do you spell it?
Goose like the animal.
Interesting. Okay. How fun. I hope they have a cute little goose logo. So, next one. What is your go-to resource for learning about AI?
I go to YouTube for everything now. I use
Yes.
YouTube, and especially there's a couple of famous person I follow. Joe Capacity is every time he publishes something, I watch it. It's like 1 to 2 hours of content. And then there's another channel. It's called Three Brown and Three Blue Brown One Blue. It's the channel, which is published by a Stanford professor. Yeah.
I wanted to share a story from this week because it's not just Women X AI, but then it's also following the women on LinkedIn. And so last week, a community member had posted about a prompt that they had used to plan their week. And it was the exact prompt. And I was like, this sounds incredible. I have a very busy week. I'm going to try it out. So I tried it in Claude. I found it really helpful. I wrote a post about it. And then just a couple days ago, someone else in the community had seen both the posts, and then she also tried it and then posted it as well. So really LinkedIn and following members of this community is where I've gone.
I love
That's
that,
awesome.
and I love how the community brings pays it forward.
So I've never had like one go-to resource, and even when I was starting my data career, people would always ask me for like particular courses, and I just go between resources depending on what I'm trying to learn. But I do have one recommendation for people who are just starting to learn about Gen AI. Kaggle has this Gen AI challenge that Google did. I did that a few months ago, where it's a 5-day challenge, and then every day there was like I think most days there was a notebook. There was definitely a podcast summarizing a white paper, so you don't need to read it, but you learn a lot. And by the end of the week, you will understand what the agent is and how it works, and a whole bunch of like fundamental Gen AI concepts that will allow you to at least feel like you're part of the conversation. Because I think there are still a lot of people that are trying to not just keep up, but even catch up or learn what it is.
My last question for lightning round is, what is your non-AI recommendation for the week? This could be a book rec, a song, anything that's not AI.
Book Tiny Experiments by Anne-Laure Lecomte. I just love that she teaches that growth isn't linear, it's circular, and that you can live life as a bunch of tiny experiments. It's really shifted it's been a shift in how I approach trying new things.
Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. I'm going to check it out.
It's great. I hope you like
Annie,
it.
do you have a rec for us?
Yes, actually, for those who are in New York City or who are planning to go to New York City, please go to see this Broadway show called Maybe Happy Ending. It's the best show I have ever watched. It won the 6th Tony Award this year. Highly recommend. So
Wow. I mean, I feel like I might need to go to New York just for that.
I will go to New York and just rewatch it.
There we go. I love this field trip we're planning. Kasia, how about you?
Yeah, so I am a massive bookworm. I've been on a long, year and a half long fiction streak. And a friend recently recommended to me a book called Butter by Asako Yuzuki. It's a Japanese book. Obviously, I read a translation. I could not put that book down. It's a story about a journalist that starts to interview the serial murderer who's in prison, who's also a gourmet cook. And it's not creepy, it's not scary. I don't like scary things. So, but she goes on this whole like transformation process. And I couldn't put it down. I just kept on wanting to read more, find out what happens next. And it has like so many twists and turns. So, thoroughly recommend that.
Amazing. I'm going to have to check that out. Thank you for the rec.
And now I wanted to ask if you have any one action or mindset shift you hope our listeners and our viewers take away from this discussion today. I can start. I can say that like the data is everything, right? And double check it all the time. Be the human in the loop and double check and be part of the game.
Do speak up and provide your feedback. There is a lot of button in our current AI tools which allows you to provide feedback. And I do see the product team from those companies adapt and listen.
Thank you. Kasia, what do you think?
My wish is that we all start thinking more about it because those conversations do not happen very often. So I wish we're all more mindful about that going forward and just spend more thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Just be aware this is happening and think about it more. Can resonate for sure. What about you, Rachel?
I was going to say, as a reflection from things that you have all shared here, it is think about your own data, that we have the ability to figure out what is being used with our data, whether we're contributing the data or not, giving feedback or not. And that's a good mind shift to have.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it better. I know I've learned a lot. And now I want to ask you, how can Women XAI community help you in whatever you're doing? How can the community support you?
Just going to say, continuing to make connections. I think that it has just been absolutely incredible to the connections that have been made. And I was going to say, Jenny, even though it feels like I've been part of this community for a long time, it was only at the end of November when I found out about what you and Reut were building and the first event that I went to. And I couldn't even imagine that less than a year after that, we would all be together in conversation. So the number of conversations and connections that I've made because of the community has been incredible. And I just hope that continues.
I can't believe it's been that short, Rachel. I feel like I've known you for years.
In the best way possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Annie, how can the community help you?
Yes, actually, to be honest, I'm a newer member compared to everybody else, and I'm just trying to immerse myself and to check out all the resources available. Like Rachel said, right? After this call, I'm going to search LinkedIn and find out where people are at. Yeah, so.
Awesome. So accept Annie's connection request when she says, hey, I'm new to Women XAI. Let's be friends. And Kasia, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm always excited to meet new people, especially women in this space. And I'm always excited to learn about AI related events.
Awesome. We've got you covered. Thank you so much for joining us today as we discuss the intersection of AI and data. Data is really the backbone of AI. Without it, your outputs are not going to be good. I always like to think gold in, gold out. Your data is more important than ever in the AI era. Thank you so much to Rachel, Annie, and Kasia who joined us today and shared their expertise on this really important topic. Now, make sure you subscribe to Women XAI wherever you get your podcasts, follow us on LinkedIn, and join our community. You can find us at womenxai.com and become a member. It's free and only takes a few minutes to sign up, and we'll keep you in the loop for whatever we have planned next.